guys. All right, great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending. Tonight is a joint special meeting of the Village Board, Development Review Board, Plan Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, and Economic Development Commission with the intent of holding a training session with the American Planning Association. This is scheduled as a joint meeting to allow for members of various committees that were able to attend to participate fully. So as it is a official meeting, I'm just going to run through a kind of lengthy roll call sheet here. If any members here are present, please shout it out. All right, of the Village Board, Trustee Vasquez. Here. All right, and there are no other members of the Village Board here at this time. Development Review Board, Member Crosby, Member Lucchese, Member Yanaki, Member McCall, here. Member Davis, Member Shoemaker. Here. All right, on to the Zoning Board of Appeals, Chairman Martin. Here. Member Plavach, Member Dombrowski, Member Price, here. Member Shoemaker, here. And Member Fishman. Sorry, I forgot. Got cut off there. All right, on to the Plan Commission, Chairman Crosby, Member Kilbride, Member Fishman, here. Member Gibbs, Member Yanaki, Member McCall, here. Member Harris, here. And then the Economic Development Commission, we've got Chairman Brown, Liz Murr, Tim Brangle, Raj Chapunkar, Member Scott Elza, and Member Preston. Okay, thank you all for attending. Before going over to the presentation, I'll just ask if anyone, any of the committee members have any questions for the presenters, just to make sure we have the microphone so it picks up on the audio for Zoom and YouTube. And other than that, I'll hand it over to the planners.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate being here tonight. My name is Tom Ferrasi, and I'm one of the trainers here on behalf of the American Planning Association, the Illinois State Chapter of the American Planning Association, and the Chaddock Institute of Metropolitan Development through DePaul University. And so what we're going to be doing tonight is going through a lot of information on kind of the ins and outs of being part of a commission or a board where you're reviewing new development or redevelopment projects and kind of the ins and outs of all of that. So let me see if, like you said, it's only, oh, perfect, okay. So again, I'm Tom, and my daytime job is I am the Planning and Economic Development Manager for the Village of Carroll Stream in DuPage County. And I'll say my side gig is I am the PODO, or the Planning Officials Development Officer, for our state planning chapter. So when we get interest from communities or counties that are interested in having training like this, they'll request that through me, and I'll organize it and either be one of the trainers myself or have other great folks who are members of our faculty assist with the training session. So we typically do between about 15 and 20 of these a year, and we do some virtual training sessions as well. So like I said, we're excited to be here tonight. I'll let my partner in crime also introduce himself real fast.
Thanks for coming out. Thanks for having us. Thanks to Jessica, Village of River Forest. We appreciate this. We enjoy this time. My name is Mike Schwartz. I'm the Director of Community and Economic Development for the Village of Frankfort. And like Tom said, we have a whole pool of us. It's not just myself and Tom. There's a group of us that volunteer to do this. I think this is maybe my 10th or 12th or somewhere in there. Tom's done a lot more than I have, but I got involved a couple of years ago. So figure I've been around for a while. I should start giving back to the profession. And that's one of the things that we do. You'll see we both have the AICP next to our names up there. That's the American Institute of Certified Planners. So one of our things will be, when you're a member of that organization, is to do these kind of things, is to volunteer. And we enjoy meeting other communities and seeing what you're going through. I'm sure whatever you bring up tonight, we've probably gone through it at some point too. So don't be afraid, as Tom will say, to interrupt us during the meeting. This is more meant to be a conversation. I mean, it is a formal meeting, and all of the commissions are here in a joint capacity. But we're here to kind of be at your disposal to ask questions. And I always say, if we don't have the answer, we will follow up with Jessica and we will get you an answer. So try to get you to the right place.
Oh, just as you finished, then.
Oh, I'm sorry. Because that's going to be completely not heard on YouTube. My apologies.
You could just say Mike Schwartz introduced himself, and there you go. Perfect.
Okay. So thank you.
Oh, that's true. Perfect. Yeah.
I gotta have something in my hand, so that's great. So thanks again to River Forest for inviting us. Give it back to Tom.
Thank you. Oh, but I think I'll use this microphone. But thank you. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. We'll go to the next slide, I think. Nope. Thank you. Okay, so here's our agenda for tonight. And as Mike said, feel free to ask questions at any point. We want this to be interactive, so we have a good dialogue or a good discussion with all of you. There's a lot of material that we're going to go through. We have on the back table copies of the slides that we're going to be reviewing tonight. So if you haven't picked that up yet, feel free to do so. Likewise, there's a sign-in sheet back there. If everyone could sign in, and I'm not sure if they put their email addresses, or otherwise we can maybe get that information from you guys. Perfect, yeah, because after tonight, what we'll do is we'll send out kind of a certificate of completion for all the folks who were here tonight, along with some additional resources that we'll talk about at the end of the presentation too. There's also a copy of the the standards that you have in your code for special uses and for variations. We're going to be talking about that this evening as well. Along with there's a I think the last document I hope is back there is a feedback form. So at the end of the presentation, please let us know if you enjoyed all of it, some of it, hopefully most of it, or if there's other things that maybe we should spend a little more time on or a little less time on. So we appreciate the feedback for future sessions. So I think we'll just get started with, is it the top one or the bottom one? Oh, sure, sorry.
Recording in progress.
Oh. Okay, thank you. So we don't have too large of a crowd here. So I thought maybe we'd start with some starter questions. You know, Mike and I just introduced ourselves, but we'd like to find out a little bit about some of you. So, but maybe we won't go through the entire room because we don't want to be here until midnight. So we want to, keep things moving through the presentation. So, but for a couple of you, if you wanted to answer that first question, how long have you been on your respective board or commission? Is there someone who is, maybe this is their first year? Quick show of hands, first year on a board or a commission? No? Maybe 5 years or less? A few, okay. 10 years or less? Okay, all right. And maybe everything else 10 years or more? Good bunch, great, okay. That's great that you volunteer your time for that. That's fantastic. The next question, again, kind of hard to ask with a larger number of people, but why did you become a commissioner? We're assuming you wanted to become a commissioner to give back to your community. Maybe the mayor cornered you at the grocery store on a Saturday morning and said, hey, we're shorthanded on a commission. Would you mind volunteering your time? So that's typically the reason why folks get involved, because they're civic minded and they have a vested interest in their community. So that's always great. Maybe we'll skip that last one. What are your favorite and least favorite parts of being a commissioner? Because we know that while it's really interesting to find out about the new projects or review the new or redevelopment projects that are occurring in the community, sometimes things can be tricky. And we'll talk more about how, sometimes you'll have a room full of people here who are opposed to a project, because typically people don't come to your public hearings saying, we love this project, could you please recommend approval? That's pretty rare. And so that can sometimes be difficult because you're also members of the community. So you're going to see your neighbors or colleagues maybe who you work with or go to church with or whatever, who maybe were opposed to the project, and you recommended approval of the project because it met all of your standards and the findings of fact, which we're going to be talking about. So just keep that in mind. So I think I will turn it over now to Mike. He's going to go through the first section of the presentation, looking broadly at the roles of commission members. Although, should I point it down, or where do I point it? Just for future reference, should I point it to this screen? Okay. Oh, all right. Is it on? It's not even on. How many planners does it take to turn on a pointer?
2.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So, like Tom said, we're gonna roll through this agenda. But at any point, if somebody needs a break, if we'll kind of read the room here. We don't want to ramble on, so please interrupt us. If there's something we say, just put your hand up. We'll try to call on you. This is informal. It's meant to be informal. So we went through the first section here, roles in the process. This is really kind of laying out what everybody's role during the review process is. This presentation is geared, and it can be toward any commission really, but the Plan Commission especially, or the Zoning Board of Appeals, they play an active role in the healthy growth of the community. Your goal as a Plan Commission member is to think long term, right? I saw that you adopted a plan. The village adopted a plan in 2019, which is good. That's fairly same as Frankfurt. 2019, we just adopted ours. So you have a fairly fresh set of goals and a vision, and now a lot of that plan, just like ours, is to lay forward maybe amending the zoning ordinance or updating the zoning ordinance, looking at things that are more in line with current development practices. Does the Plan Commission, and I'll ask you first, and the Zoning Board as well, do you visit the sites prior to maybe the meetings? Show of hands is pretty much you go and you drive by, maybe park on the street. Good, that's really recommended. The staff reports can be great, but there's nothing like being there on the site, seeing the traffic passing by, and really getting a sense of what's happening around the property. One of the things we recommend as a commission member, any of the commissions, economic development, design review, Plan Commission, Zoning Board, is to really stay informed on local issues. I'm sure you follow your Facebook feeds from the community, what people care about, what they're concerned with. And then, of course, your newsletter, your local newsletter, whether that's online or in paper format. The role of elected officials, obviously, it's pretty self-explanatory. They are the people elected by the electorate, the community, to represent broad policy issues. They, as was indicated, the mayor appoints you all to the board with the concurrence of the elected officials. They have some non-land use responsibilities, so they're looking at the whole picture. Your commission that you serve on is relatively focused on one area. One of the things I've noticed, and I won't name how many years I've been doing this, but in a long career, I've noticed a lot of the commissions tend to, and it's not, it's pretty much everywhere. It's pretty universal. The commissions will veer off sometimes off topic from what their charge is, what their, as they say, stay in your lane. And I hate to be that blunt, but I've had Plan Commissions get involved in bring up questions that are more economic development. I've had zoning boards get more involved in matters that are maybe more long-term planning. So it's good to have that foresight, but that's really what the elected officials are. To they have you on a certain commission for a reason. You have a role to play. The elected officials, the village board, is ultimately the final authority on land use decisions. You make, as a commission, you may make recommendations to them. There are some communities where certain decisions can stop with the one of the commissions, but generally speaking, matters of land use, which would be zoning changes in the zoning map, changes on the zoning ordinance itself, which we call a text amendment, special use permits, variations. Typically, those matters, you're serving an advisory role to the elected officials, and again, they're taking your recommendation and weighing it against sometimes other things. They should be looking at the standards, which hopefully you've applied, the findings of fact, which we will focus on heavily tonight. But ultimately, the village board has a greater oversight. The role of the planner and staff, you have, Jessica, you've got professional staff here. Some communities have a professional staff, some do not. Sometimes the building department may serve in that role, and it just varies. We've worked in really small towns of Population 2000, where the building official was really acting as the planner and didn't have a professional staff. We've worked in communities where there's 5 or 6 planners, and they all have different roles, different tasks that they do. So it really depends on the community, but whoever your staff person is that's putting the agenda together, getting the minutes out from the last meeting, pulling everything together, that person is really important because typically they have some kind of professional training, but also they're the quarterback, I say, of coordinating comments from maybe the fire department or the fire. In some cases, it's a separate fire district like we have. The Public Works Department might weigh in on a project, or the Public Utilities Department. Putting all that together for this in your decision making to have all those different personnel and different agencies. It could even be the school district, these separate entities that are separate from the village. Getting that input hopefully prior to the meeting and put into the staff memo that you would receive, so that when you come to the meeting to make a decision, you kind of understand what the different perspectives are from the different agencies. So again, it might be a professional city planner like ourselves, or somebody just in one of the departments. This person, again, is going to guide the commission, but also beyond your meetings. You show up monthly or maybe twice a month for a meeting. In between those meetings, there's a lot going on at the Village Hall that a lot of times the commission doesn't see. So I always say, and I'll use my community as an example, a lot of the things we see on an agenda for every 1 or 2 items, you might have 3 or 4 other projects that came to staff. We've had meetings about it, and maybe it just didn't meet the standards of the village. We had maybe a concept plan floated, and it never comes to a commission meeting. A lot of times that's happening behind the scenes. And our goal as staff is to kind of filter some of that so that the projects that do come to you hopefully have a good chance of approval if they meet the village requirements. But that's, each community kind of handles that a little differently, but that's probably a best practice. One of the things that staff does is again, standing at the counter all day and helping citizens. Citizens aren't necessarily informed in a lot of these matters. The only time they might have interface with a village staff or a professional city planner or somebody from building department is that they're coming to a counter, they want to build something, a pool permit or a garage or a redevelopment, or you could have a real sophisticated developer that's been through this before. So staff is dealing with a variety of individuals every day. And again, some of those proposed projects may not even come to you. So keep that in mind, that as projects come to you, sometimes the project's already been kind of maybe a site plan or something has already somewhat been refined before you would even see it. To make sure that, why would we bring a project as a staff person to your commission if, right off the bat, it doesn't meet, X number of things from the zoning ordinance or the landscape ordinance or whatever it might be, some of the site plan review standards. So a lot of times that's happening before you even see the project. Working with staff, this is really important box that I always circle. Call staff or reach out through your staff, through your, usually the questions, whether it's the chair or any member of the commission, funneling those questions to the point person on staff so that those questions can be answered at the meeting. The worst thing from our perspective, being on the other side of the desk, is that, and it happens, you come to a meeting and there's someone who's known for a week, they're going to ask this question and they save it for the meeting. A lot of times I say, that's where we do training with our commission to say, call us right away, because then it's not helpful if I don't have the answer at the meeting, or if we come to the meeting to say, you had a very specific legal question, we can consult our attorney on that before the meeting. But if you drop the bombshell on staff at the meeting, it's not always the best practice. You might have a question that you didn't think of till the meeting, that's fine. But we always recommend as a commission member that you use your staff. They're there for a reason. Your staff will help you. If they don't know the answer, they'll find someone in the village hall or the legal department or whatever that will have an answer, so that when they come to the meeting and then they share it out. I have a practice of, if one commissioner sends me an email or calls me on the phone, I'll send and I blind copy everyone. We're going to get into open meetings or communications and things like that. But I have a practice. It's always been trained. People have trained me. You always send the information to everybody. We're not picking favorites. I'm going to share the information with this commission member, but not that commission member. It's all about fairness. It's about open transparency in decision making, so that if one commission member had the question, probably other people in the commission had the same question but didn't ask. So I'll send it out, and I'll send an email saying, hey, Commissioner so-and-so had a question about XYZ. I'm sharing this response that I have with new information so the whole commission has the information. Just a really good practice. The staff report. I don't know how detailed your staff reports are. This, in my 30-year career, is all over the board. I've had communities that do one-page staff reports, and that works for them. I've had communities that I've worked in that write a thesis for every zoning, small zoning matter, a garage setback variance, and it's 10-page report. You don't need to have that. So what works for your community, there's no one size fits all. Whatever works for your community. If you feel, look at other communities, go to other meetings, go online. Everything's online now. I really like Naperville's staff report format, or I really like the way Frankfurt does it, or whoever, Carol Stream. Whoever, you look at different report formats. If you're getting the information that you need to make a decision, whether it's the text of the report or lots of pictures, graphics, maps, that's the key takeaway. Don't be afraid to kind of revisit that with your staff and kind of point out, these reports are too long, I need a summary, or I'm not getting enough detail, could you give me more graphics and pictures, because I think it'd be helpful to have that. Don't be afraid to change things. The staff report, obviously, is self-explanatory. It goes through the comprehensive plan, the objectives. Having a fresh comprehensive plan like River Forest has, 2019, it's only 5 years old. That's really great, because I've worked in communities where that staff report, whether it's a memorandum to the elected officials when it gets to that level, or even to the commission, any kind of project should always tie back to the goal of the plan. Goal number 3.2 on page 75 of the plan, whatever it might be, relates to improving density in our community, or whatever it might be. How does that project coming forward that evening that you're voting on, that one little project that's just one property, how does that relate to building the fabric of the community one parcel at a time? And if you can tie that memorandum, whether it's, again, to the elected officials or one of the commissions, back to one of those goals, it's always a good practice to kind of reshape the focus of why the decision on that property is important in the bigger picture. Some reports do have recommendations. You might have comments from other departments, like I mentioned, comments from the public. Sometimes we'll attach emails that we've received prior to the meeting. We'll send those out afterward, or hand those out the night of the meeting. So that, again, the commission has all the latest information. People ask me a lot, does the report from the zoning board or to the plan commission have to have a recommendation? It doesn't. There are some communities that really have a long history of staff saying, we recommend approval or we recommend denial. I've heard from the land use attorneys that many towns have gotten away from that, and there's nothing wrong with it, but here's the example. I've been called into court a few times myself. I've had depositions that I don't enjoy thoroughly sitting through. And what the practice that I think, and this is my opinion, and what works for you might be different, is that having a report that has all the facts in it, okay, spells out what the plan calls for, what the standards of the village are, how the project may or may not meet those requirements. That's enough information that you can form your own opinion on it. And sometimes staff will write between the lines some bullet points, some concerns. Red flag goes up, right, if staff calls out some concerns about the project. But the recommendation, so let's say I'm a city planner for some other town, and I've recommended approval, okay, on a project. It goes through the process, and then the plan commission recommends approval, but then the board turns it down, and it becomes maybe a legal question later. Well, now I'm probably a witness for the other side, and now I'm going against my employer as far as saying, well, I recommended approval because it met the plan, and it puts the village board, let's say, in a tricky position because they said no. So just from zoning matters, more towns, I believe, are going away from staff saying, I recommend approval, or I recommend denial, or we recommend approval or denial. I'm not saying it's wrong, but what I've heard from some of the land use attorneys is it's probably more common to get away from that. I mentioned the other, you're all this evening are members of these. So communities have design review boards, commissions, economic development commissions, environment, historic preservation, transportation. Generally, what we're talking about tonight is planning and zoning, but a lot of the principles that we talk about are really applicable to any of your commissions in how to effectively run a meeting, how to take testimony, public comment. It's just good legal practice to kind of follow some of the things we're going to point out tonight. The commission, again, I'm kind of going, I got to speed it up a little bit. I don't want you to keep here all night. So the other key actors in this, obviously, if you have an attorney, sometimes we'll invite our attorney if we think there's going to be a legal question or a project that really needs legal advice. But generally, in some communities, the attorney's at all the plan commission or zoning board meetings, sometimes just as needed. They may or may not attend the hearing, but if there are questions that the commissions have or the members have that are maybe legal in nature, we're going to talk about recusing yourself if you have some interest or you're afraid that maybe you kind of think you might have an interest. Those aren't questions to ask at the meeting. Those are questions, again, no matter what commission you're on. If you feel like, oh, I should really recuse myself because my company does business, ask your staff. Say, this is an attorney question. Let's get this out of the way so that when you come to the meeting, you don't have to raise the question. The developer, this is a key point here, and you're helping me with that. Thank you for doing that. The developer's role. So they really are the people that are bringing the money to the table, right? We all remember the Great Recession, 2007 through 2009-ish. Developers are important. They're the ones that are investing the money. The lenders, of course, play a role. But these are people who want to invest in your community. They're your neighbors in many cases. Sometimes they're from out of town. Sometimes they're local. But, we always portray them as the big bad developer. And it's not always the case. I remember during the downturn, I was with a community that laid off quite a few members of the village staff. And, how important it was that when we think about what we do for a living as city planners, we wouldn't have jobs without the developers. So I never disparage developers. There are good ones and there are bad ones. But it's key to keep in mind that they are the people that are investing in your community, and all they're asking for is fairness, right? They're more than times than not, I just met today with a developer, they appreciate upfront honesty from staff, from the elected officials. If they can have a process that's predictable and they get a no early in the process, as opposed to months of public hearings and then a no at the end, that's what they appreciate, generally the ones that I talk to. So they know that they're not going to get every project approved, but I think if they come into a community and you have a reputation as a community for being fair with the way that you handle your hearings, the way that you take testimony, the developers play an important role. The one bullet point on there is, I think we have it here at the bottom, developer's perspective, the next slide. Right at the top bullet point, they can spend six figures, like I said, and go months just to hear no at the end of that process. So I'll move ahead on that slide. And then, of course, the other jurisdictions I mentioned, you have a number of public entities that are just as important as the community. They are the community, but they're different taxing bodies. They have different elected officials. But a lot of times the decisions you make as a village, whether it's economic development project, maybe an incentive program or a project, or a zoning matter, or a large redevelopment, whatever it is, these other jurisdictions are really key. And it's important to get feedback into that staff report early on where they might sit on an issue, or at least make them aware. We share our agendas. They're online now. But we have a habit of emailing them out to the different agencies, making sure if there's something in their jurisdiction that might impact them, we're adding, units to the school district or whatever it might be. They need to play a role. The Regional Planning Commission, here in Chicago, we have CMAP, which is the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. They are the regional planning agency, planning organization. They deal with transportation funding in the region, issues that cross municipal borders. So clean air, clean water, bike trails, transportation projects, something to keep in mind. And there are a few other around the state. There are a few other regional planning commissions. Champaign-Urbana has one. But generally speaking, CMAP, and you'll hear that, is Chicago. CMAP is a great resource too. I'll mention them later. You want to skip ahead to this? So just we're going to throw a couple little nuggets in here just for interest. Hartford, Connecticut became the first city in the United States with an official and permanent city planning commission in 1907. And prior to this, planning commissions were generally disbanded once a plan had been developed. Just a little trivia question, I guess. So the next one, do you want to plug this one, Tom? Well, I don't want you to just hear my voice, so I'm going to switch it back and forth.
Yes. So for the low price of only $50 a year, we do have a specific state membership versus the National Planning Association membership. So we don't handle River Forest budgets. So we just put this information in there, and if folks are interested, then always talk to staff. Thank you.
I highly recommend it. It is a really reasonable cost, and you get the little magazine, and you'll get the emails, just what you want, more emails in your inbox. But our commission members we take advantage of if there's free webinars or training. We always advise you get a discount on the state. If you're a member of a commission, you do at the state conference every year, which is coming up in September, I think. It's a 2.5-day conference. This year it's in Chicago at the old post office, which is really cool. Next year, Champaign, or it kind of goes back and forth, north and south. But if you're a member of a commission and you have the time and can do this to go in person, they do offer, Tom's going to plug a session that he is moderating, I guess, coming up for a plant specific to, similar to this, but it's an online version of this. But yeah, I recommend it. And the more literature and knowledge you get of being a member of one of these commissions, the better. So commission responsibilities. Commissioners have an important role. Obviously, I mentioned the elected officials. So staff is going to explain the request typically at the meeting. The applicant will come up and advocate or maybe add to what staff mentioned. And then once the commission is ready, they open the hearing, right? If there's a public hearing. And their job is, especially the chair, this is very important, to listen to everybody's concerns. Give everybody fair voice at the meeting. And the number one thing, a lot of times when we talk about due process for people, whether it's a resident, developer, maybe they feel like they didn't get the decision they were looking for. One of the things is how was the judge will look at is how was the process conducted? Was it fair? Did people have adequate opportunity to come up to this podium and speak freely and not be cut off or not be, that kind of thing? So that is very important. Commission responsibilities. I mentioned attendance. Maybe we want to hit on that real quick. This comes up a lot, even in my. Yeah, let's go to. Oh, did I skip past it, Tom? On the attendance. Well, I'll just mention, attendance is important. You have obviously one of the things that we. You want me to do this section?
Oh yeah.
Am I going right into your? I'm rolling onto your section, Tom. I'm sorry. And we've rehearsed this a few times, believe it or not.
Did anyone have any questions on all the information that Mike went through, your specific role, regardless of the commission or the board that you're on? Everyone, that all made sense? Great. Because we're going to delve a little more thoroughly into you. Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Oh, you know what?
I thought it was interesting that you mentioned at the start that commission members should go and check out the site where the development is going to happen. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes.
Yes. That seems a little. It would seem like when you're doing finding of facts, you should just let the testimony come in as it comes in and you make your finding of facts based on what comes in rather than me going Sunday afternoon to an intersection and going, well, there's no traffic here. And then I come back and that's what taints my decision. versus having the city or somebody on the board come up with telling me how does traffic look like in general. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, you bring up a fair point. I think site visits have to be taken in context, right? You're not a traffic engineer. So if there's a question about traffic, you're going to want data for that. But your observation of the site for the development activity, understanding that there is a lack maybe of screening that doesn't really show up in some of the photos, having that visual knowledge of the site, understanding the topography, the lay of the land, understanding the character around the site, because it's adding it. They're not replacing one another. What you're visiting the site to gain context, but you're also then going to listen to testimony to add to that context.
So are you saying it's subsidiary finding of facts, but finding of facts should come from another source? The facts should come from another source?
The facts are coming from a variety of places, and you're going to be listening to maybe experts, maybe a traffic study or a traffic expert, a resident. You're going to have a different set of people giving you.
I don't want to hog this meeting, but for example, there's a case, I'm a lawyer, and it was a study where there was a social security judge.
Okay.
Somebody comes in and says, I have a disability, right? And those are the facts come in. The judge follows the guy out and says, oh, he threw out his walking stick and just walked to his car, so I'm going to deny his request. And well, that was found to be bad fact finding. That's not the role of the social security administrator. But it seems like what you were suggesting is that we should exactly do what that person did, which is follow the person out and then make my decision that, oh, he shouldn't be given social security. He shouldn't be given.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different context because in the terms of land use, the plan commission, especially when you're serving as a plan commission member, let's say some of these aesthetic questions about context and the architecture that surrounds the site, you're looking at what's out there, informing your basis for what your decision is going to be, in addition to the standards that have to be met for the village. Because otherwise, you're just looking at pictures on the screen.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to say, to piggyback off of what Mike just said, it's one thing to look at a plan, whether it's in paper form or on your computer. It's another thing, though, to look at it within the context of that property and where it is in conjunction with the other properties in the neighborhood, per se. So I think that's the difference, yeah.
I really want to support going out to the site on
Mhm.
the development review board. And I do that before the meeting, and it helps give me a sense of the size of the property.
Sure.
And, instead of looking at the site up on a board, I have a much better
Mhm.
feeling about, what they're planning to do.
Sure.
So I don't know, I feel like it's essential.
And we do advise that you obviously not trespass. There's the public right of way. We say, unless the developer has, granted permission, sometimes you can, if somebody's on there and,
We usually say don't go into someone's backyard. Just
right,
look at
right.
it from
So
the
it's
street
from
or
the sidewalk, from
Yeah.
the street. But understanding the context around the site is so important as far as, especially when you're getting into design considerations.
Great questions, thank you. All right, so now we're going to look a little more closely at various responsibilities that you all have. So the first point here is making sure that when you're coming to your meetings that you're prepared, that you're reviewing the information that staff has prepared, staff reports and other documents along with what the applicant has prepared ahead of time. We know, based on some questions that sometimes commissioners will ask, whether you've read the information or not. I don't know, do you get paper copies or electronic copies here? Electronic?
Generally, it depends.
Okay.
We always email out the packet. But
Okay.
occasionally, with certain projects come up, and then
Sure.
the prints are much easier
Yep.
to read.
Sure, yeah. Because I was going to say, when we see the rubber band coming off the packet the first time, 5 minutes before the meeting, we know that maybe that person had a busy week and they didn't get a chance to review things. Or I've had instances where, a commission member might ask a question that has been probably answered in literally the first paragraph of my staff report and the cover letter that the applicant has provided. So just make sure that you're prepared. We want you to ask questions, relevant questions, of course, but just make sure that you're prepared, before you come to the meeting. And that's going to include those site visits that we just talked about, and contacting staff ahead of time if you do have those questions too, and making sure that you're playing an active role when you're at the meeting. So first, make sure that you attend meetings as much as possible. Sometimes in the summertime especially, it might be tricky, but there's nothing more, I'll just say this because we're not staff members here, so we can sometimes be a little more blunt with things, but there's nothing more embarrassing than not having a quorum for a meeting. And the applicant has maybe flown in from out of state or out of town. They have their attorney, they have their architect, they have their civil engineer, they have their traffic engineer. They have all of these people here, and only 3 commission members show up, and you need 4, let's say, for the meeting. It's embarrassing because it's almost, I don't want to say disrespectful, but it's a sign to that developer, well, do they even want my project in their community? So things come up, we understand that, and everyone's a volunteer, but make sure you can come to as many meetings as possible. And if you're not able to attend, or if you're sick or something, that comes up, of course, let staff know sooner rather than later. So if we know ahead of time, oh boy, we're not even going to have a quorum for the meeting on Thursday night, that helps us prepare for that inevitable conversation we have to have with the developer. So listening to staff, the applicant, the public, and other commissioners during the meeting itself is really important. That's that notion of active listening, where you don't necessarily have your mind made up on a project. You want to make sure you've reviewed all the documentation so you have an understanding of the project, but that you're listening to the testimony or the information that's being provided during the public hearing itself. And consider the project's relationship to, Mike had mentioned this a few slides ago, your community's comprehensive plan. So we always talk about the comprehensive plan. That's your kind of master plan or master planning document for the community. And then you have your zoning code or your zoning regulations. Those are kind of the laws or the do's and don'ts of what you can and cannot do based on things from a zoning perspective. So review everything based on the context of your comp plan and then your zoning regulations. Further along with some additional commissioner responsibilities. I'm sure this isn't a problem in River Forest, but you always want to make sure that you're acting in as professional of a manner as possible. Avoiding certain types of jargon or having maybe side conversations with commission members is usually not a great idea. When you maybe have members of the community or individuals who are voicing their concerns or are rather stern with you as a commission member, don't take it personally. Just make sure that you're always patient, courteous, and respectful. You don't want to have any type of shouting match or anything like that. We're going to talk in 1 or 2 more slides of how important it is for the chairperson of a commission or a board to make sure that things are running as smoothly as possible in instances like that. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's pretty rare for members of the community to come to a meeting to say that they love a project. They're usually coming because they have concerns, or maybe they just don't fully understand all aspects of the project. So keep that in mind, and that you're remaining calm and you model appropriate behavior for all. Bless you. Additional responsibilities, specifically at the public hearing. I'm not sure if River Forest has your own rules of procedure, or if you follow Robert's rules to a certain extent. So that's kind of the steps that you're taking or the rules that you're following during a public meeting or during a public hearing. It's always good to kind of maintain that so that you don't fall off balance of any kind during the meeting. So that's good to do. And I think that 4th bullet point is important, avoiding debates. You want to hear the public's questions and then comment on those later. So we'll talk about how the chairperson handles that, I think, in the next slide. And if necessary, you can postpone or continue a hearing if you need some additional information. So for instance, we were just talking about traffic. So if, let's say, a traffic study was conducted for a project, or a parking study was conducted for a project, but it was a year ago, and that's what was provided by the applicant. And maybe there have been changes to that roadway or to that neighborhood, whatever the case may be. It probably would be acceptable to request updated parking or updated traffic information and postpone or continue the hearing to a date certain to maybe provide that additional information so you have that good understanding of how this project may or may not impact traffic or parking in that area. So just make sure that it's relevant. It's a relevant request when you're continuing or postponing a hearing, because again, as in one of the slides that Mike was talking about, developers, they want to be good neighbors, but they're spending a lot of money, and they typically have a relatively short due diligence period, so they want to try to get through things as quickly as possible. But if you need more information to make a good recommendation on the project, then by all means postpone or continue something.
And I would just add to that for a different reason. I mentioned maybe adding a traffic study or some piece of information the commission feels, what, we really don't have all the information. We need to make a good decision. We're going to postpone. The other reason would be, let's say your meeting starts at 7. I've had these where the meeting's at, going until 11:30, 12 o'clock. No good decisions are made at that point. At some point, this is important for the chair to kind of read the room and say, you know what, we have 3 other items on the agenda tonight that are fairly straightforward or should be. Let's continue this matter and move forward. And I don't know, it's different for every commission. So maybe you're used to 3-hour meetings, but usually a couple of hours is like the max, for good decision making.
Yeah, I was going to say my chairman has a 10 p.m. cutoff point. And our meetings start at 6. So if you've been talking about something and hearing information about a project for 4 hours, and there's still plenty of individuals in the room who have questions or want to provide comments, it's probably a good idea to maybe postpone that to the next available meeting, because quite honestly, commission members might not be able to have the brain power, so to speak, to have all of that information over the course of one night. So unless you guys like having meetings until midnight, I don't know, but. Okay, so we've talked about this a little bit, and in the next section, Mike's going to spend a good amount of time talking about your standards and findings of fact specifically. That's how you always, always, always want to vote. Not on a personal opinion, not on the fact that, well, I've lived in town for 30 years, I know how that shopping center functions, so on and so forth. I know how that neighborhood is situated. It's based on your standards, and so you hopefully have the handout that was provided. That's verbatim from your code. Those are your standards for special uses and for variations. That's how you make your recommendation. And we can't stress that enough. It'll keep you out of trouble in the legal department, I'll say. So always vote based on the standards. You want to give appropriate weight to a staff recommendation if the community provides a staff recommendation. You want to keep an open mind, and you want to recognize that the audience may not represent, as we've talked about, all views in the community. So if you have 20 people here who are opposed to the project, well, guess what? There are probably thousands of other people who haven't shown up because they don't have a problem with the project. So keep that in mind. And discuss with other members the project itself only during the hearing. One of us is going to talk about that. I think that's me. But we're going to talk about making sure that we'd say, have the meeting at the meeting. So don't talk about stuff outside of this room, okay? So there are some items that are not reviewed by specific boards or commissions, and you do want to keep this in mind. So similarly to making sure you're reviewing things based on the standards or the findings of fact that have been presented, you also want to make sure that you're not kind of going past the purview of your specific board or commission. So some items are only reviewed at the staff level. So building code related issues. Previous community where I worked, we had a commission member who was like a project manager or construction manager for a construction company. And so he would sometimes ask building code related questions or a question about the elevator or whatever the case may be. And we'd have to very nicely remind him that's not under the purview of the Plan Commission. We have a building official who's going to make sure that the project is reviewed based on the codes, the building codes and fire codes we have in place, and the building's not going to fall down. So that's not Plan Commission or Zoning Board or Development Review Board's responsibilities, normally speaking. You might be interested or curious about those types of things. Ask staff, but you don't necessarily want to bring those types of items up during the public hearing itself. Some items are only reviewed by the elected officials. So like what Mike was talking about, they're the decision makers, they're the policy makers, and so they're going to be reviewing maybe projects from a financial perspective. So if you have TIF districts or tax increment financing districts in your community, you might review a project located within that district, but you're not reviewing the agreements or kind of the financial documents or tools that are associated with that district. So you shouldn't be asking those types of questions unless the Economic Development Commission has some role in reviewing agreements like that. If you do, then great, but if not, you don't have to worry about it. And then some items are not really reviewed by anyone at the village hall. So if you have a residential project and the developer has provided floor plans, including furniture plans, and a commission member starts asking about, well, is that the right layout in the bedroom or the kitchen or whatever? No. That's irrelevant. It's not under your purview. Again, you might be super curious about that because we're humans. You're commission members, but you're also humans, so you might be curious about those types of things. But just make sure that those are questions that you keep to yourself or ask staff, depending what the item is. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Okay, so the responsibilities of the chair, and we have at least one chairperson here, right? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Did you have a question?
Can I just ask something
Sure.
on the last ALD?
Sure, yeah.
So what if some of the items not reviewed by the municipality, what if they have to do with viability of the project? Like you mentioned sales prices,
Uh-huh.
you don't talk about, but it kind of goes to viability,
Well,
success of the project.
potentially. So sometimes what a developer, again, let's say it's a residential project, and I'm just going to make something up. It's a 3-story apartment building, and they're going to have a certain number of 1-bedroom apartment, 2-bedroom apartments, and 3-bedroom apartments. And they maybe just provide a kind of a data sheet of here are the rents that we're proposing for those, the 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom units. And you think to yourself, wow, those are kind of out of whack with what we would generally see in our community. The developer is going to figure that out. They're going to know based on the market what they should or should not be charging for rent. Unless you have a specific provision in your zoning regulations that talks about rent, I would recommend not discussing those items because, again, it's not going to be under the purview of a planning commission or a zoning board, typically speaking. In some instances, it might, but generally speaking, that's information that's maybe just provided just to provide. But you might not want to get into the nitty-gritty of those types of things. Yeah. Does that make sense? Or okay. So the chairperson, there is he's sitting in the back because usually you're in the front, I'm sure, right? So I there you go. I understand. You can run out, absolutely. But your role is really important. The chairperson has probably the most important role because you want to make sure that you're running the meeting as, I'll say, correctly as possible. The chairperson's setting the tone. The chairperson's making sure the agenda's being utilized, Robert's Rules of Order, whatever procedural documents you might have. They're making sure that if things go out of whack and maybe comments are being provided by members of the public that are not really in line with what the matter is on the docket, so to speak, that night, then the chair can say, okay, folks, let's get back on track with things. Let's make sure that we're following the provisions that we have. If there's interaction between commission members, you can let commission members know, okay, folks, that's not what we're reviewing tonight. Let's get back on track with things. So it's really important to make sure that the chairperson is setting the right tone for the meeting. And again, when we have a room full of individuals who have concerns and they've got their fists raised, like, we don't like this project and we're going to tell you we don't like it until midnight, the chairperson can, politely or diplomatically make sure that information is being discussed because you want to hear from the public, but you're not doing it in a heavy-handed manner. You're following the procedures that need to be followed, making sure that everyone is heard who's at the meeting, but making sure that the meeting is running as smoothly and as efficiently as possible. And expediting things too. If 10 people come up here and say, I have a concern about traffic for this project, person 1, person 2, person 3, person 4, and I always look to the municipal attorney on this, but we've been told that it's acceptable for the chairperson to say, okay, we've heard from several individuals that traffic is a concern. So we're going to absolutely take that under consideration when we start, discussing or start having our Q&A section of the meeting. Are there different topics? Are there other items that folks who are here this evening would like to talk about? It's usually okay to do that, right? Hopefully.
Yes, you can prevent repetitive
Right.
repetitive comments.
Right. Thank you. So I won't repeat what you just said because I agree.
And one thing I'll add to, before you move on from this slide for the chairs, really important, and you probably already do this, but some towns don't. You'll probably have a meeting, right, where people are turning and they're maybe aimed toward you and they're at the podium here talking to the commission. And someone else starts a conversation in the audience and they turn and now it's a conversation. All the comments always need to be directed to the commission,
Yeah.
to the chair.
To the chair. Yeah.
And if someone else wants to come up and say something, great.
Right.
But the side conversation, so the chair really sets the tone. It goes without saying, but we have to get it in the training because
Right.
there are
Yeah.
some towns that don't follow that.
Sure, you're right, yeah. And or you get nervous because, again, if you have a room full of people, you're not sure, oh boy, what's going to be the topic of discussion or the debate tonight. But there's no need for debates. Just make sure that everyone is heard, that needs to be heard, and you can move on from there. So here we have kind of a flow chart of a typical public hearing procedure. And every community is going to do things a little differently. So as long as these items are being handled during your public meeting or public hearing process, you're in good shape. So the chairperson is usually going to start out by, I'm going to call the meeting to order. I'll go through the list of things that need to be taken care of. And then staff might present the staff report first. And then the applicant provides their presentation or their summary of the project. In Carroll Stream, we do it the opposite, where the applicant goes first because we feel it's their project, so they're advocating for it, like we said a few slides ago, so they should be going first and giving their PowerPoint or their presentation on their project. And then staff is determining whether it meets all of the codes and things like that within the zoning ordinance itself. Is that how you do it here? Yeah. So you're allowing time for the public to speak, so the public comment section. Then you can close the public comment section, and then it's time for the commission members to discuss things amongst themselves and ask questions of either staff or of the applicant, and then you make your recommendation. So either way is fine. Sounds like you have a good handle on how you're running your meeting, so that's great. Taking testimony during the public hearing itself. Again, like we had mentioned a little bit ago, you want to hold a fair hearing so all views are heard. Everyone has the right to speak, but you don't have to have that repetition. And then that last bullet point, I think, is really important. We can't stress that enough. The number of people for or against the application shouldn't be criteria for your decision. Unless that's one of your standards, if a room full of angry people don't like the project, you have to recommend denial. But it's not. So if that's not the case, then you can be bold and recommend approval of a project if it truly meets all of your standards. You might not be invited to the next Christmas party or the next Thanksgiving dinner with your friend in the community who was, adamantly opposed to the project, but you've done your job as a commission member.
So we're pretty much hitting the halfway mark. If anyone needs a break, we're at topic number 4. So we want to keep rolling, or does anybody need a break? Okay. And these first two sections are honestly we always call it the meat and potatoes section of the presentation, because it's really important just so you have an understanding of what your roles are and specific responsibilities on your respective commissions. So this is just a quick little summary of the points that I just mentioned. But if you have questions along the way, just let Mike or I know. One question I had for all of you: does anyone mind if we take photos? We sometimes like to highlight our training sessions and our monthly newsletter, and so you might be on the front. Well, I was going to say front page, but it's electronic, so the front image of our newsletter. So is anyone opposed to that, or is River Forest opposed to that? I should have asked that question first. So okay, all right. So make sure you're like feverishly writing notes or something while I'm taking a picture. But
Sit up straight.
yeah, set up straight. Yes. And now, this will be where you're going to take notes because it's findings of facts. Yes.
So this is a fun one. This is findings of fact. And what is that? So basically, these are the items that you will take into account when you're making your decision, right? You're gonna listen to the staff. You're gonna listen to the staff report. You're gonna listen to the applicant.
You're going to synthesize all this information. You're going to apply the standards of the village for that type of request. So we're going to get into whether it's a zoning change or a special use permit or a planned unit development, a zoning variation, whatever the plan commission or zoning board would be reviewing, you're going to have the standards in the ordinance for that type of request. And you're going to make findings. Does it meet the standard? Does it not meet the standard? That is the basis to ensure fair decisions. You have to be consistent in your decisions. The evidence must show how the standards are met based on the code. You have to refer to them when you're voting. And then this is really important if there's litigation. So one of the things I always say to my commissions, and any commission really, avoid, if you can, the I like phrase. I like or I dislike. Because it's really not about whether you like or dislike the project. It's whether or not that project is consistent with the standards that the village has set through its adopted ordinances and codes, specifically the zoning ordinance. People talk about precedents, and this comes up a lot with zoning. I'll use a zoning board example. So somebody wants to build something in their backyard, and they've got a 100-year-old oak tree right in the center of their backyard. But they want a reduction of a setback, maybe to build a pool or a gazebo or something, a deck. That's pretty unique to that property, that oak tree. It's not necessarily that everybody on the block has a 100-year-old oak tree in the middle of their lot. Or I could use the example that maybe there's a lot that's a weird trapezoid shape, or it's got a street on the front and a street on the back. It's a double frontage lot. There's something specific about those kind of lots that aren't necessarily applicable to other properties. Because a lot of zoning boards will say to me, and I've had this happen over the years, well, if we say no to this guy on the height of the fence or whatever it is, we've got to approve all of them. And I have to remind them, no, you don't. Every property is a little different. And so you don't have to have the fear of, if we say yes or no, whatever it might be, to this person, this applicant, how does that apply anything moving forward? You're not necessarily setting precedent in that case, especially in zoning matters. Zoning where you're relieving someone of a code requirement, a setback, or a fence height or something like that. There's special circumstances related to that property. I use the 100-year-old oak tree. There are other reasons. So it's something to keep in mind. And it should be land-related hardships, by the way. We'll talk about hardships a little bit. People ask, well, I have a hardship. I need a taller fence because my neighbor has a vicious dog. That is a hardship, but that's not a land-related hardship. That's not something that is specific to that piece of land or that parcel that's unique. I've had people in tears at meetings because the zoning board turned down their height variance on the fence, or that kind of thing. Especially fences are one of those hot button topics. So you don't, when you're a commission member, especially of the zoning board, you're not necessarily, you don't have to worry about if you say no on this, you always have to say no, or if you say yes, you always have to say yes. That's not the case. Next slide here. So findings of fact, there was a landmark zoning case in 1957. It was LaSalle National Bank of Chicago versus Cook County. And you'll hear planners, land use attorneys talk about the LaSalle factors at the bottom of the slide here. That's based on the LaSalle case. So when people say the LaSalle factors, there are 6 factors, and I think they've added, maybe my brain is not working, but I think there was 1 or 2 more added in later years. But essentially, the courts have said that these particular factors should be taken into account, especially when it comes to a zoning map amendment, or in layman's terms, a rezoning. So when you're amending the official zoning map, you're rezoning a property, these are the LaSalle factors are what should be taken into account. So you're looking around the property at existing uses and zoning, the suitability of the property. Maybe it's got poor soils or it's got really good soils, depending. The length of time, how long it's been vacant. You're looking at property values. That one gets a little tricky. That can be, you're probably having competing maybe appraisals if someone's objecting and they're saying, no, this is going to affect property values. That gets a little difficult. Promote the health, safety, and general welfare, kind of one of those big lofty sort of standards. And then public hardship, public gain versus hardship to the owner.
So, and then you look, one of the other ones is the how long, the vacant one, looking at trends of development. So you might look back and say, is this proposed change in zoning, is it consistent with other zoning changes in the immediate area or adjacent to the property within the last year, 5 years, 10 years? Is there a trend that can be established to make the case that, yes, this change in zoning is consistent with those previous decisions? So you'll hear this from planners. It's when you look at a map, and I don't see a zoning map, but sometimes you have your color zoning map on the wall, and you see all the colors. You're primarily a residential community. I saw you've got yellow, orange, a lot of single family, a lot of multifamily, and then commercial corridors maybe are red or purple, industrial areas. That's Euclidean zoning, basically. And what does that mean? There was a famous court case in 1926, Euclid versus Ambler Realty Company, Euclid, Ohio, versus Ambler Realty Company. And basically that was a zoning case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And Euclid was the community that was the final decision maker on this. And the realty company said, no, your zoning is not a valid. You can't tell me how to use my property. This is you don't have the right to do that. That was the first zoning case, 1926, that did establish that the police power of a municipality, zoning is a valid police power of a community under the state authority granted by the state statute. So it broadly affirmed the constitutionality of zoning and led to the growth of zoning ordinances all across the United States. I always tell people when people say, we should be like Houston or whatever where zoning is, non-existent. And I think even Houston now has a zoning ordinance, but years ago they didn't. They would allow a gas station next to a hotel, next to a single family, and it was just, not well planned. Zoning is, to me, when I state it to people in layman's terms, when they come to my counter and they say, you can't tell me what to do with my property, how dare you, these are my property rights, I can build whatever I want. I always remind them in a nice, gentle way, zoning is really an ordinance that protects you from what your neighbors might do. And I flip the script, right? You're telling them, yes, it does limit. It tells people if you buy a piece of property and it's only residential, and it's in the middle of the neighborhood and you want to put a gas station there, it's spot zoning, right? Well, the courts have called that spot zoning. So zoning is valid. At the Supreme Court, we've established, literally next year would be the 100th year of that decision.
I was going to say, so party in
zoning.
River Forest, 100 years next year.
Special, or some towns call them conditional uses. These in Illinois, and states are different, in Illinois, special uses, I have to remind my own board of this, that there are uses in your zoning ordinance that essentially are permitted uses subject to conditions. Because a lot of times the thought is, it's a special use, we can treat it differently than maybe something that's permitted outright as in the code. These are uses that might, if with certain conditions, maybe limiting the hours of operation or having the parking lot lights turned off at 10 p.m. on an auto timer because there's a nursing home next door, or whatever it might be. These are things that you can approve the use subject to legitimate, what they call rational nexus conditions that are directly tied. Now you can't, you get into a condition that says, well, I'm going to only approve this if they paint the building pink. That would not have a rational nexus to maybe the use, right? But turning the parking lot lights off at 10 p.m. and having maybe extending or adding even more buffering between the uses, transition buffering, to mitigate any concerns about light pollution or noise. Those are legitimate conditions that have, as the attorneys would say, a rational nexus to the limitation that you're placing on that property. Variations. These are things where you're either typically reducing a requirement. And these are generally they're the dimensional requirements. So maybe reducing a setback, as I mentioned with the oak tree example, or sometimes they're increasing a requirement, maybe the fence height, because you limit fences to 4 feet and 5 feet is, desired for whatever reason. These are dimensional variations. A lot of zoning ordinance, more modern zoning ordinances, will have restrictions specifically prohibiting variations of use. There are some old zoning ordinances out there in communities that do allow for variations of use. And the argument from the land use attorneys is, well, why wouldn't you just rezone the property if you're going to allow a use that maybe isn't otherwise allowed in that underlying zoning district? But variations can be, in my opinion, one of the more, they can be difficult as far as decision making because, again, you're dealing with an individual piece of property that has its own unique circumstances. And then there's always the fear from most commissions that, hey, if we say yes or no to this, we're going to have to forever and ever say no. And that's just not the case. So remember, findings of fact, they're going to be your responses, if you will, to the standards, that what the standards for a zoning change or the standards for a variation or a special use permit, how those standards are or are not met. And meeting and the question comes up to, we have to meet all of them. The attorneys have told me, no, you have to meet the preponderance of those. So, commission members have the right to say, I don't feel that all 7 of those standards are met. I feel that 5 of them are not met. And then you vote accordingly. But if you are, 6 of the 7 are met, that's been told to us that, yes, that is reasonable. So special uses, lifestyle factors I mentioned, and then a variation, just the property has a practical difficulty or something particularly land related that there's a hardship for. And it's a need, not a want. I need to have a 4-car garage. You don't need to have a 4-car garage. You want a 4-car garage. Those are the kind of things that come up often. Any questions or discussion? Yes, sir.
Our code says you have to meet all the standards.
Okay, if your code specifically says all, then that's what I would go with, because that isn't the case in every zoning ordinance. And the other thing is sometimes it'll say, especially in variations, I know like our code has 3 that have to be met, and then there's supplemental. So you should follow all, if you feel that one of them isn't met, your vote should be accordingly.
So I have a question about your land hardship. When we get a lot of applications before the zoning board,
Mm-hmm.
and the hardship is my family has grown, we've outgrown the house, the kids need their own bedroom, we want a master suite, and by the way, we want to blow up the kitchen so we can have an island for the wife. I don't think any of those are the type of hardships that our code envisions we act upon.
It sounds more like a want to me than a need. And also, it's a particular family circumstance, nothing related to the property itself.
No, we're not talking about an odd-shaped property. We're not talking about the 100-year oak in the backyard. We're not talking about runoff from the neighbors. We're talking about my family has outgrown this house, and I can't afford to move. Therefore, I need this variation.
We focus on land, and it's really a land use decision, and that's really your purview. When you start getting into some of these other sort of familial matters and family outgrowing space, that kind of thing, you're going away from land use decisions with that.
So I hope that the members of the ZBA who are here and the trustees to whom we make our recommendations will take into consideration what you're saying.
Thank you. Anybody else? Questions? Yes, sir.
Well, with findings of fact, due process basically requires that you arrive at a decision based on findings of fact. Shouldn't the zoning board or development review board first decide on what the findings of fact are before they take a vote in order to comply with due process?
Yes, absolutely. That's a good point. So some towns will weave that into the motion. We are recommending approval to the village board based on the findings of fact, sometimes as presented by staff on behalf of the commission. Sometimes the commission itself will write those.
But typically, your motion, you would reference in the record that you're making your decision based on those findings, and nothing else. Excellent point. Yes, sir.
I have one comment, just generally on finding of facts. You have the ordinance, they mentioned, you have facts that are found, and you have a result. And as you know very well, facts are adjusted to go through the prism of the ordinance to get you the result. And that typically is what generally happens when there's discretion. I don't know, I don't have a question, it's more a comment to
Yeah.
what's brought up.
No, it's a good point. Do you adopt? Just a question for staff. Do your procedures right now? Do you have the findings where you state them on record, and then, or do they make that as part of their motion?
So we're actually adjusting the findings of fact procedure. We're in the process of adjusting that right now. Typically, what has been done is that the public hearing will occur. The board or commission will state their findings on the record as to why they're taking the vote that they're taking, the particular vote that they're taking, and they'll give direction. And then written findings of fact have been prepared based on the verbal input that has been received, and then it's been adopted at the next meeting. And what we're in the process of doing is sort of pre-preparing a draft, at least a shell of a draft that can contain the kind of the bones of the findings of fact. Obviously, we can't complete that before the public hearing occurs.
Right.
So the board or commission is free to make whatever findings they want in terms of approval or disapproval of the particular item. But what we've been doing is bringing forth sort of a draft of the findings as applicable to the particular topic. And then what the board will do is direct staff to finalize those, which will then be reviewed and signed off on by myself or whoever the attorney is who attends the meeting, as well as the chair of the particular board or commission.
Good. We one of the things, a couple of practices, and again, every community does things a little slightly differently. One of the things we do in our community is we attach, because we don't figure that everyone carries the zoning ordinance around in their backpack or even on their phone. Hey, let me pull up this 125-page PDF and find the findings. So in the body of the staff report, we just say this is a special use request, and in the third or fourth paragraph, these are the findings copied right out of the ordinance. And then even more helpful than that, as an attachment to the report, we just made a nice little worksheet. So we have, and we don't fill it out. We just say here are the findings, and it says commissioner notes, comments. So as you're reading the report, you can say you have kind of a worksheet. So you can kind of, prior to the meeting, get your thoughts on that. And maybe you do that on your own with notes or whatever, but we provide that little handout as an attachment. The other thing I've seen, another community many years ago that I worked in, it was interesting the way they did things. They had a separate, their plan commission and zoning board were separate. Some towns I know that combine them. Their zoning board had a practice where the staff would prepare the findings in advance and then the commission would either agree with what staff presented and adopt those as staff's findings, adopt staff's findings as the findings of the commission, and they would state that on the record. Or they'd say, we don't agree with number 2 and 3, we're going to modify that, and then they would adopt that. But it was kind of pre-prepared for efficiency of running the meeting. And then the findings were put on letterhead, signed by the chair of the zoning board. And then when it went to the board, the village or the city council in that case, they had on letterhead signed by the chairman of the ZBA, the findings that were made. That's very formal. I think just having it in the minutes and having a record of it is what most communities do nowadays. But just a couple of different examples. All right, moving on. So we've talked about special uses. I'm losing my place here. Sorry about that. Because I'm going to kick you out.
Yeah, it's your turn.
So now we're going to talk about the fine print. And what this means is what you should or should not do at public hearings or public meetings or when you're out and about as a commission member. There's this notion of ex parte communications, and you're going to see this image, have the meeting at the meeting, which I described, 30, 40 minutes ago. You're going to see this on several slides because we can't stress it enough to make sure that you're discussing components of a project that are under review by your board or commission only during the public hearing itself, and really no place else. And that way, it saves you trouble from a legal perspective down the road if something were to occur. So ex parte communication is contact between a commissioner and either an applicant, an opponent of a project, or a supporter of a project outside of this room, basically, outside of the public hearing, and that's kind of a no-no. So the example that I had mentioned, I think, at the beginning was if, let's say, on a Saturday afternoon or Saturday morning, you're at the grocery store and someone says, "Oh, hey, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you for a year. How's it going?" And, "Oh, that's right. I remember you're on such and such commission, and I think I read that your commission's going to be reviewing this project on Smith Street, and boy, let me just tell you, I have lots of concerns about that project." That's when you say, "Oh, it's good to see you. But you know what? Technically, I'm not supposed to talk about the project outside of the meeting itself. And so if you're able to attend the meeting on that Thursday night at 7 o'clock, great. If you're not able to attend, we've got fantastic staff. Send them an email or a letter, and they maybe will read that into the record, or they'll provide it to all the board members or the commission members. But, technically, I'm not really supposed to talk about it outside of the room. So sometimes it's a little awkward, but that's your best bet to do that, whether it's whether it's in person, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an email. Try to stay away from all of that. If it does occur, let staff know. And in another slide or two, we're going to talk about maybe what you'd have to say or disclose at the beginning of a public hearing for that project too. I'm just picking on you because you're sitting in front, but I'm sure you would never do something like that. So. Likewise, when you're doing site visits, we talked about site visits, and maybe you're just on the public sidewalk and you're looking at that person's fence, and boy, do they need a tall fence or not, whatever the case may be, and a neighbor comes up to you and, "What are you doing? You've got this drawing or whatever in front of you, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm a member of such and such commission, so I'm just here, for a project or for a variation that we're going to be reviewing." You should leave it at that, and if they have questions, contact staff, attend the meeting, send an email, so on and so forth, but you don't want to have any type of dialogue outside of this room, okay? Because we all have to be ethical. We all have to make sure that we're doing things as ethically as possible, and not accepting gifts of any kind from maybe potential applicants for a project, which again would never happen, I'm sure, in River Forest, but just making sure that you're doing things as ethically as possible. And if you do come into a situation, or if there's maybe a potential conflict of interest, talk to staff, talk to the municipal attorney, and they'll guide you through that process, okay? And what could be considered a conflict of interest? Quite honestly, there are probably very few things that are considered a conflict of interest, but it's good to be aware of what they are. Sometimes individuals might have concerns that there's a conflict of interest for something, and it's a project that's going to be reviewed by the board or commission that you're a member of, and in actuality, it really isn't. If you have questions, let staff know, but technically there are only a handful of situations or scenarios where there would truly be a conflict of interest, and that would be if you have a business or financial relationship with the applicant as a client or as a customer, or if you have a financial interest in the project or are a business partner with the applicant, or you own the property. So if, let's say, you own property in town and that someone's going to be coming before a board or commission for a variation or a special use or whatever the case may be, and it would benefit you as the property owner for that item to be recommended for approval and then ultimately approved. Those are situations, that's a total conflict of interest, and you don't want to have any involvement with reviewing that case. There's also this notion, though, my voice just cracked, sorry. Also this notion, though, of appearance of impropriety, where maybe there's this thought that, boy, it's my neighbor right across the street who's asking for that fence variation, and our kids have grown up together, and we're coaches on their soccer team together, and so on and so forth. I don't have any type of financial interest in their project, but is there this notion that I can't appear or review their request? Is my judgment going to be clouded because I have that relationship? Talk to staff. And that determination will be made. Ideally, talk to them maybe sooner than 5 minutes before the meeting's going to start, but let them know, oh, I've seen on the docket, on the agenda, such and such project. There might be this, I don't have a financial interest in the project, but there might be this notion that I might not be able to review the project in as truthful of a manner as I could be. I can do it, but talk to staff about that first if you ever have scenarios like that. It's really important to do, because what could potentially happen is, let's say that grocery store example that I gave, where you're talking to Mr. Smith about that case, and Mr. Jones is also at the grocery store, and they see you talking to Mr. Smith, and they know that, I'm going to get the names mixed up now, they know that Mr. Smith is opposed to the project, or maybe Mr. Smith is in favor of that project, and so, oh, he's whispering in your ear as a commission member, well, make sure you vote, favorably for this project. They come to the commission meeting and say, well, I saw the two of them discussing this last Saturday, and so maybe, that commissioner's mind is already made up. Potentially that can happen, right? Because you're members of the community, and so you're going to be out and about at various events or various locations. So it is a good idea too, on this next slide, we talk about what should happen in certain situations. So the example that I gave of you own the property where the request is being made, so as the property owner, you want to disclose that, you want to disclose that information, but you want to recuse yourself totally from being involved with that case. So you would state on the record, I am the owner of such and such property. I'm going to be recusing myself, so I'm not involved in the review of this project, and you should actually get up and leave the room. Just to be on the safe side, because we all have, I'm not a very good poker player, so my poker face is really bad, so sometimes you make gestures with your face or with your eyes, or you'll shake your head, or you'll nod your head, or you'll do, I talk with my hands because I'm Italian. So you do those types of things, and even if you maybe weren't sitting at your normal spot, but you sit in the audience while that case is being reviewed, you still might, it might look potentially as if you're trying to persuade your fellow commission members or board members to vote in one way or the other. So just leave the room. They'll come and get you when that case has been reviewed, so you can review the next items on the agenda. But it's always a good idea to do that. Likewise, if there's that appearance of impropriety notion, or hey, that is my we're soccer coaches together, but I can still review this project favorably, and staff and the village attorney has said, that's fine, you can vote on or you can review this project and make a recommendation. Probably disclose that on the record too. Just it's on the record, and then you're safe. Okay. Hopefully that's good.
Yes,
good advice.
That's
Perfect.
definitely
Okay.
good advice. But
Sure.
I would also say that if it's enough for you to have a question about it, it's probably the appearance of impropriety.
Right. Yeah, I agree. But there are a bunch of situations where sometimes we'll get questions like, is this a conflict of interest for me? So voting on general laws which affect all citizens, no, that would leave you out of everything basically then. So you can obviously make recommendations on that. It's a request from an organization in which you are a member. So there have been instances where I've had commission members, maybe their church or their place of worship, they have to amend their special use. They're going to do a building expansion and a parking lot expansion. And so they say, well, this is the church or the religious institution that I attend. Should I be voted on this project? We've said you can, but maybe you want to disclose that on the record too at the beginning of the meeting. Likewise, a commissioner related by blood or marriage to the applicant but has no financial connection to the project, that's where you probably want to talk to folks, and it's not a conflict of interest from a financial perspective, but do you really want to vote in favor or maybe against, your brother-in-law's project? And yikes. So when in doubt, just
We
ask.
can't stress this enough, and we mentioned it earlier. If you have any questions about any of this, don't bring it up at the meeting.
Right.
Try to give your legal counsel, your village attorney, time to get you an answer that can be communicated through your staff.
Right, absolutely. Yes. The Open Meetings Act, probably folks are familiar with the Open Meetings Act, and typically you have to do training maybe within the first year or so of when you're a commission member. It's just having this understanding that our meetings are open to the public, and so we want to be as transparent as possible when we're having all of our meetings. And making sure also that the public has access to all of the information as well. So just being clear on that. So this notion of transparency that we always hear about is true and is crucial. And keeping in mind certain pieces of information regarding or related to the Open Meetings Act. When you have a public hearing, there's some public notification requirements that need to be done. Usually a minimum of 15 days, but no more than 30 days before the public hearing itself. But if you're having a workshop like this, then typically you don't have to follow those to a T. It's usually more of just 48 hours notice, posting things on your website, so on and so forth. So a public hearing is always a public meeting, but a public meeting isn't always a public hearing. I think I said that correctly. So,
Yes.
And this last bullet point is also really important too. A gathering of a majority of a quorum to discuss public business is going to be considered a public hearing, whether that's in person, whether that's through text messaging,
Meeting.
emails, on Zoom, on Teams, whatever the case may be. It's always a
We need a public meeting.
what did I say? Public hearing? Public meeting. Yes, I'm sorry. Public meeting. Yes. And so if, let's say, you have 7 commission members, so your quorum would be 4. So the majority of that would be 3. So if 3 of you are talking about a project, that's a public meeting. So don't do that. But if it's one-on-one, if it's 2 of you, you might want to steer clear of that as well, but it's technically not going to be considered a public meeting. So you can all attend the Friday night concert and talk about family things or social things. Just don't talk about what's on the agenda at the next week's meeting. So bullet points to remember: conflict of interest if you have a financial interest in a project or a business relationship with the applicant, or that notion of the appearance of impropriety. So follow the protocols that you have, talk to staff, talk to your municipal attorney. Be careful when gathering as a majority of a quorum to discuss things outside of this room. And if you have any questions, always ask staff or your municipal attorney. And have the meeting at the meeting. Then you're covered. You don't have to worry about doing anything incorrectly. So any questions about that? Sometimes we get questions about conflict of interest. Yeah. Although I don't know where the microphone is. Oh, sorry.
Just throw it.
Uh-oh.
Give you an idea of conflict of interest, a concrete example. A number of years ago in Lincolnwood, Misericordia sought a special use permit to open a group home for 6 women with developmental disabilities. Illegally, I might add, it's illegal to require a special use permit, and River Forest still requires a special use permit for a group home for people with disabilities. And the village president recused himself from everything because he had a daughter who lived at Misericordia, not in this group home that was going to be bought, but lived there, and just exited the room completely. It was, I think, an extraordinarily good example of recognizing the appearance of a conflict of interest, even though I don't think it would have influenced the board, but it was a very proper thing to do. Other thing is, this is a real world example as well in a town of 11,000, but I won't name the town, where 2 village trustees were invited by the opponent of someone seeking variances, the next door neighbor who had been harassing this woman because she's of a Mexican ancestry all along, and invited 2 trustees out to come and talk to him and see his property in opposition. A clear impropriety. One of those trustees is no longer on his town's village board, but certainly I would hope all village people understand, and it's not a reference to YMCA, that it is, while you can go and visit a site, it is very much a violation of due process to talk to someone about the site while you are out there, or even any ex parte contact, as you said. But I really want to, I think what you're saying really needs to be emphasized, because you've given people really good guidance, and you certainly should not be inviting members of the group or the village board to see your site and talk to them outside of the hearing.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm not a member of a commission, but I'm just listening. And am I understanding then that commissioners, or I assume this also applies to boards, that no two, let alone three, should be talking about things outside of a meeting? Is that right? Really?
Yeah, so if, again, that example that I gave was if there's 7 members on a commission, and 3 of those 7 members, so that would be considered the majority of a quorum for that commission. If they're talking about a project or a case outside of the public hearing, they shouldn't be doing that, because then that in and of itself is considered a public meeting. Yes.
Well,
If it's one-on-one, though, if it's 2 people, I would say.
And it's key to remember that's a violation of the Open Meetings Act.
no, I'm talking about just say 2 people.
2 people, okay.
So wouldn't be a violation.
That would not be a violation.
Not for a board of 7. It would be a violation for a board of 5.
Gotcha. Okay. It's the quorum thing. Okay.
That's a good point. Thank you, yeah.
Yeah, kind of.
All right.
Yeah, we don't get too far into it.
I think we are in the last section.
Yeah, we're toward the end. Is anybody going once, break or just trying to read the body language?
Motor.
Trying to keep it moving. So this last part here, tools of the trade. This is going to be, a lot of this you're going to probably know, so I'm going to go kind of quickly because looking at the time. You have different types of plans depending on what board or commission that you're on, right? The one that you hear the most is the comprehensive plan. It's comprehensive. It covers topics ranging from land use to transportation to infrastructure to different community goals. So this is really the most popular one, I would say, the one that ties everything together. But you have very specific plans sometimes. You might do a downtown plan that's very focused just on the downtown, or a corridor, for example, a neighborhood, a specific subject matter plan, a housing plan, really focused on affordable housing, for example. A watershed plan if you have any environmental issues, transportation, preservation, sustainability. These are all different types of plans. They're all equally important, but the one you hear the most probably is your comprehensive plan. I usually say the comprehensive plan is the blueprint, like Tom mentioned earlier. The zoning ordinance is the tool that builds the blueprint, right? The zoning ordinance helps implement the big picture. The comprehensive plan, again, it's authority established by Illinois state statute. A lot of times having a plan, there are communities that don't have a plan, and that's fine, but having a plan does sometimes allow you to maybe apply for grants that you wouldn't otherwise be able to apply for. Within the comprehensive plan, I mentioned the different things. Your plan is only, 5 years old now, 2019. Good reminder to just keep a look at it, because as you're looking, you get kind of bogged down in the day-to-day your run-of-the-mill zoning matters that come before you, right? Variations or special use permits. You really should keep in mind how those individual projects help implement or don't implement maybe the comprehensive plan. Do they further the plan? And it's a good practice, as I said, to mention, the goals of the plan that might be met through implementing that project. Okay, did you know that the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago showcased Daniel Burnham's idea for the City Beautiful movement and offered a blueprint for growth and the vision of what cities could be? Just nugget of information. Did anybody know that?
Well, it goes with the next slide.
So who said that? Mr. Daniel Burnham. We've all heard this quote, right? Many times, make no small plans, or make no little plans. So basically, he is considered the father of city planning. Public participation in planning. So this is important. Having social media, especially not necessarily for, you want to use social media smartly. You want to use it when you were doing your comprehensive plan. I would imagine there was a lot of public input on that, right? Focus groups, sessions with different sectors of the community, and then putting that all together as in a reaching consensus and the final decision makers adopting that plan as a policy document for the entirety of the village. So this is, all these matters are important, different type ways to get it public improvement or public participation. The other thing, like I said, is have the public input on a individual zoning case, equally important, but that's really different. What we're talking about here is the long term, the big picture planning or downtown planning, or if you were doing a plan for a corridor, or maybe a new economic development plan where you're going to lay out the different incentive policies of the village. Working with the public, making participation as easy as possible, having rules of procedure, having the chairman, the chairs of the different commissions announcing at the beginning of the meeting, folks, if you're new here, this is how the meeting's going to run. We're going to have our public hearings. You'll have a chance at the beginning or at the end of the meeting to have comment, or during the hearing for that individual zoning matter, whatever it might be. Very helpful. Maybe swearing everybody in en masse. Are you here to speak this evening? Everybody raise your right hand. That kind of thing. Having those procedures in place is key. Always with long-term plans where you're trying to get a lot of public input, you work for maximum turnout. Should never expect it, but using all the social media, the pop-up events, maybe having a booth, the village having a booth at an event for the new economic development plan or the downtown plan or whatever the next thing is, or even the zoning ordinance update. Hey, folks, we're doing, at our fall festival, we have a table. Here's some highlights, some bullet points of some new zoning. We're going to make Excel as ADUs or accessory dwelling units. We're going to adopt those now and have that allowable. What do you think? There's going to be a hearing next month on it. Getting those kind of resources out there for the community so they can participate in the policy making process to make recommendations to the elected officials. Who are your neighbors? This is self-explanatory. These are the demographics of your community, understanding what is important to the community when you're doing one of these long-term type plans, these big policy documents. Some of the people in our field as city planners that we like to reference, they weren't planners by education per se, but they were influential. These are people like Jane Addams, people like Rachel Carson. I'm going to skip over all the bullet points for sake of time, but these are people in our field that really made a difference in livable cities, in urban planning. Plan implementation. This is where, again, you're all making recommendations to the elected officials. Ultimately, they are the final decision makers. And one of the things, is to make sure that all of these initiatives, whether it's economic development, zoning matter, or some new planned unit development proposal, that you're implementing your long-term plans, your downtown plan, maybe your corridor plan. Questions? Yes.
Based on your experience, I guess that's on, how often do you think a village should redo their comprehensive plan?
There's no right answer or wrong. I've seen communities do 20 years. Ours is a 20-year lookout, and I've seen 10. Every 5 should be, if you do a 10-year or a 20-year, 5 is a good round number. Whether it's 6 years, no one's going to, say that you did it wrong. But if you look back in a period of time to say, okay, how are we on target of the 25 or 50 or whatever number of goals were set forth in different categories? There's goals for transportation improvements. There's goals for land use changes, goals for just community enhancements, public art, whatever it might be. We want a new library, whatever it is. How on track are you to meeting those goals? And the projects that are coming forward, are they helping implement or build that vision? So you think of these individual zoning cases as kind of in a microcosm, but they're really a patchwork of individual zoning decisions or maybe economic development decisions that are implementing the bigger picture. And that's why at the end of this presentation, we reference kind of keeping that bigger vision in mind as you're dealing with individuals. It's easy to get hung up on the garage case or the fence variance case, that kind of thing. And we all have those types of cases, but the bigger projects, the redevelopment projects, the streetscape corridor plan that they're going to do out here, or whatever it might be. How is this new development that is on that street going to implement that vision? Is the developer going to help participate in maybe improving the streetscape in front of their property? Question? I thought you raised your hand. Anybody else? So we're moving pretty quickly here, Tom, so I think you have the final leg.
Either way.
I'll give it up.
And I just put a cough drop in my mouth, so I apologize, but I will get through it. So regulating development, we sometimes, with this last section of the presentation, sometimes think, should we put this at the beginning of the presentation? Because we talk about zoning and certain things like that. We make the assumption that everyone in the room has a basic understanding of their zoning code and their regulations. And so that's why we switched it to the end of the presentation. But if in your feedback surveys, this information we're going to go through fairly quickly, if you think, boy, that would have been helpful to have at the beginning of the presentation, let us know, because I'm 50-50 sometimes. So I'll just leave it at that. But regulating development, you have, as we've talked about, there have been court cases here in Illinois. There was the U.S. Supreme Court case from 1926 that we're all going to be celebrating next year for its 100th anniversary. And so we have these regulations in place, and we can use those regulations to review and analyze new development and redevelopment projects. So it's really important just to remember that you have those tools to utilize, and we're going to talk about what some of those tools are. So zoning, we've talked about, the comprehensive plan is the master plan, and then you have your zoning code. Those are the regulations you have. And those are really bulk standards that you have for building setbacks and for building heights and for lot coverage or floor area ratio, different things like that, based on all of the different zoning districts that you have. So one zoning district you might allow for a building or a structure to be closer to a property line. In other districts, you might have setbacks that are further away from the property line. So those are the bulk standards that you have, and it's the tool that you're utilizing within your zoning code to make sure that communities, neighborhoods, corridors, so on and so forth, are designed and developed appropriately. We talked about, most communities will have their zoning map with all of the different zoning districts for multifamily residential, single-family residential, commercial, industrial, so on and so forth. Making sure that, as you're reviewing your comprehensive plan and your zoning regulations, it goes hand in hand with, well, should the zoning map be updated sometimes? In Carroll Stream, for instance, we've had a property along North Avenue that's been zoned for commercial development since it was annexed into the village in the 70s. It's about 20 acres, so it's a good piece of property. It's still vacant, and the reason it's still vacant is because just to the north of it is our water treatment plant. So find me a developer who's going to put in restaurants or shops downwind, I'll say, of a water treatment plant, right? It's a little tricky. So our comprehensive plan calls for light industrial development there instead. The residents to the north of the water treatment plant have some concerns about industrial development there, but we want to get you out of here before midnight, so don't get me started on that piece of property. So, but looking at the zoning map and looking at the different zoning districts in your community is important to do from time to time. And being familiar with what the kind of the rules and regulations are for each of those districts. So did you know? I think this is our last little trivia question that you guys can razzle-dazzle your friends and neighbors with. July 1916, New York City enacted the nation's first comprehensive zoning code. So that's important. So you can see like that late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a lot of cool stuff going on from a city planning perspective. So keep that in mind. Types of zoning approvals we've talked about already. Permitted uses. So in your zoning code, you have that chart or that table that says, here are all the permitted uses in each of the zoning districts. So those uses are allowed outright, and they would apply for permits to do whatever work they need to do, but they don't have to come before any board or commission. special uses or conditional uses, as Mike said, are allowable uses in that zoning district. They just need more thorough review. Variations we've talked about, and then PUDs or planned developments are tools that are used. I think we'll get to the next slide. We talk a little bit more about planned developments, but tools that are used for kind of creative layouts for projects within your community. I was correct. So a PUD or a planned development, I'm a fan of PUDs as long as they're used, I'll say, correctly or appropriately. So what I've seen in Carroll Stream, the residential neighborhoods that were developed in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s all came in as PUDs, and it's pretty obvious they came in as PUDs so that the developer could crunch in as many homes as they could in that specific subdivision or neighborhood. Because talk about some odd-shaped pieces of property. I think, holy cow, how did someone approve this subdivision 40 years ago where the lots are, I mean, in a perfect world, a lot would be a square or a rectangle, but these are, I don't even know what shape some of these lots are. So that's not why you should use a PUD approach for development. It should be used from a creative perspective so that it's a win-win situation. So the developer is maybe able to develop their property in a little more creative way versus the kind of the standard cookie cutter development you might see if they're only utilizing your zoning regulations, right? Not to say that they shouldn't be, of course they should be, but maybe the property itself has a creek running through the middle of it. And so how are they going to be able to develop it based on the standards that you have within your zoning code for that specific zoning district? So the community is getting a development that's more creatively designed. The developer is able to have a little more flexibility in their design. And so again, it's that win-win situation. So that's how
it's
PUD
really
should be used.
clustering density.
Right.
So if you have a 100-acre farm field, and like you said, your developer lays out a street and uses the cookie cutter because all the lots have to be 10,000 square feet or whatever, instead of whatever the number of houses they would have gotten through the cookie cutter standard subdivision approach,
Right.
To preserve natural features, a woodland or a wetland or something like that, clustering that same number of rooftops on smaller lots and making it more walkable, but maybe preserving a green belt or having more. So it's creative land development using a planned development approach, not just to grant density bonuses, but we've allowed them to. They're a special use permit typically in the underlying zoning district. But if there are density bonuses, some towns allow that in relation to tangible community benefits. So a clubhouse, tennis courts, pickleball courts, whatever it might be, walking trails, things that the developer above and beyond what the standard zoning would require. Right. That's typically a planned development or a planned unit development.
Yes, I agree. As we've talked about, you want to make sure that you're keeping your zoning current. So if you're looking at your comprehensive plan on a fairly regular basis, look at your zoning regulations too on a fairly regular basis. If something is a kind of out of step with the standard operating procedures from a zoning perspective, then maybe the code should be changed. If you're granting the same variation all the time, maybe that provision in your code was relevant 20 years ago, but maybe it's not as relevant now. So work with staff or make that suggestion to staff that maybe it's time to update that section of the code. Subdivision layouts. So do plats of subdivision go to the Plan Commission or the Development Review Commission, or it depends? You don't have your, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If you did, and they maybe went to one of your commissions, it's more of, we always look at it as, staff has done the heavy lifting on subdivisions. So we're making sure that the subdivision is laid out based on the subdivision regulations that we have. The street width is what it's supposed to be. There's curb and gutter, parkway trees, street lights, things like that. And sometimes it's more of just a administrative process to have a plat reviewed by a plan commission or development review commission, so on and so forth. And then ultimately the village board or city council approves it, and then it gets recorded. So just making sure that you have that understanding. Yeah. And then this last bit of information, we talk about annexations. I don't know, is there a lot of unincorporated land? It's pretty landlocked, so, okay. Again, if you did have, in Carroll Stream, for instance, we have a lot of unincorporated properties in DuPage County surrounding our municipal boundary. And so we review annexation requests on a pretty regular basis. And so the annexation request itself isn't reviewed typically at a zoning board or plan commission level. You might, again, review the project that's going to be developed, that subdivision, the shopping center, whatever the case may be. But the annexation request and any documents or agreements are going to be reviewed at the village board or city council level. Just having an understanding of what that is, where if you have unincorporated property adjacent to your municipal border, it can be annexed in or incorporated into your community. So these are the last bullet points. Making sure that you understand your comprehensive plan is your policy guide for your community's future development. Zoning regulation, those are the tools you use when reviewing projects, and making public participation as easy as possible for all members of the community. So I think we have reached the end, other than we always provide resources, books and magazines and podcasts and websites that you can go to. And we put them in the slides. And then we also have them in the handouts with all these wonderful links. Well, you can't click on those links in the piece of paper you have in front of you, right? So when we're done, and Jessica's going to email all of your email addresses to us, we'll not only provide, like I said, a certificate of completion to all of you who were here tonight, but also these resources you'll get in a PDF, so you can click on them and spend your weekends learning as much about city planning as Mike and I have learned or tried to figure out over the last how many number of years. So we have reached the end. So any final questions or items or suggestions or any?
I have one thing to add. I was asked to talk at this training session by Chair Crosby, who I know is not here, but I was asked to say something briefly about deference to other units of government.
Sure.
So schools, park districts, in exercise of zoning authority. So there are a couple of cases that talk about that. One is Wilmette Park District versus Wilmette. Another one is the Gulba. It's either Gulba or Gerba, but it's that's a case about a school and whether they were subject to zoning. And generally what's been found is that other units of local government are subject to the village's zoning authority. However, the village cannot step into the statutory duties of the other body and substitute its judgment for the statutory duties that are vested in the other body. So the exercise of zoning authority has to be limited to areas of traditional municipal concern, such as setbacks, such as other kind of basic zoning exercise of authority, and it cannot deny petitions from other government bodies if doing so would be to step in and exercise its statutory authority. So I have those citations. If anyone wants to talk to me more about that or have a discussion or get those citations, feel free. I'll provide it.
That's great, yeah. It always gets tricky when you're working with the park district or the school district, and do they get permits from us? Do they go before the plan commission? Do they not? But yes, we make them go through the ringer, but nicely.
Yeah.
with what we're allowed to.
I had worked years ago with a community that was very rapidly growing, and they had a bond referendum to control the growth for the school district. And they built, in a course of a 2-year period, 9 new schools.
Oh.
I think that might be a record in Illinois. But so all those schools plans, the site plans for the schools landed on my desk. And the question always came up like, well, the village really doesn't have any authority here. We do. We have zoning review, but obviously school buildings, typically school buildings, will go for their building permit through a different different process than the community. A lot of people don't know that, but zoning is, like she said, valid.
Right. Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Just real quick, beginning you talked about the staff report and not making a recommendation in that.
So that is that's probably a better practice to be neutral, because staff, we have to maintain neutrality, obviously. But there are communities that have long-standing tradition of staff making, Carol Stream, making staff actually making, because we're professionals, we have the degree or whatever, but I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I think it's probably more prevalent now, and I'm hearing from other land use attorneys that staff, it's probably a preferred practice that staff state the facts of the project and cite the code sections that are applicable. We know the codes inside and out. We don't necessarily expect the volunteer commission members to really know the zoning ordinance frontwards and backwards. It's our job to parse out those parts of the ordinance that are relevant to what your decision will be, and the standards that would apply. But that's probably the practice that would be preferred to, some towns say, well, what if I want to know from staff, a commission member or a board member might say, what if I want to know from staff, that they really don't want this to go through? Well, it's not our opinion. It's about, does it meet the village standards or not? And also, if we have concerns, and I always tell the commission members, if you see 2 or 3 bullet points or things that I've laid out as concerns, or things that are missing maybe from the submittal, they're missing, they probably shouldn't be on the agenda. But if there's things that are, items of concern that staff has raised, and you see a few bullet points, that's one thing. If you see a laundry list of concerns, that's probably your red flag that staff has, that maybe in the past days of making a recommendation would say really should deny that.
Right. And I think one of the slides we had said, staff is explaining the request, but it's the applicant's responsibility to advocate for their request, right? So, yeah. Good question, though. Anything else? Oh, in the back, yes.
If the zoning code is silent to something, like let's say it doesn't address design standards for a garage, and
So if the zoning code is silent to, let's say, design standards, and it, for example, a garage, and somebody comes forward and asks, okay, can I put a metal garage in my yard, but you don't have any design standards? Is that meant to be automatically a no because it's not addressed?
Are they coming before the commission, though, for a variation, or?
Well, would they need to do so then, in that type of case?
Not being totally familiar with your code, but if they didn't need any type of variation, then
Yeah.
I don't know if they would
Like,
need.
our zoning ordinance does regulate materials and even gets into roof pitches and basement size and all kinds of other facade features, let's say for a single family home or a multifamily building. It's best practice if the community wants to make a policy decision. Maybe that's a workshop item between the plan commission and the elected officials. If once a year you get together to kind of discuss these kind of bigger projects, ADUs was the rage. I don't know if they still are, but having accessory dwelling units, anything that's not maybe in the zoning ordinance right now, or you're thinking we're getting a lot of these metal roof requests or whatever, have that discussion, that policy discussion. And if it's something that they feel they either want to expressly prohibit or to state that it's okay subject to whatever standards, it really should be baked into your zoning ordinance or in some other ordinance that would regulate based on which commission it's coming to for review.
Or on the opposite of that, I would say if it's not in your code, you probably shouldn't be discussing it. But I don't know the context of the question necessarily, so I just want to be careful. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Through that, and would also
Sure.
explain according to river forest standards.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say, is that there's other places in the code other than
Yep.
design regulations that may prevent that from being constructed regardless.
Building code. Yeah, we have provisions in our
Building code,
Yep.
etc.
One thing specific to the zoning code would be if there's a particular use of a property that isn't spelled out in our land use chart, and we have a lot of things spelled out in the land use chart, then it's in our code, it states that it's automatically treated as a special use request. And if we were to see many of those, we would probably decide to incorporate that into the land use chart and determine which districts best fit.
Right. Great questions. All right. Well, thank you all very much. We really appreciate it. We always learn a lot of cool things when we are here as trainers as well.
We
so
do enjoy
appreciate it.
doing this. We learn a lot about the community, and then again, this doesn't end. If you have questions for us, we're happy. You think of something after, we're happy to be a resource for you.
Absolutely.
And thank you to Village of River Forest
Yeah. Thank
for
you
inviting
for letting
us.
the speaker. Yeah.
Yeah, we
Appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
Motion a second to adjourn, but we can do it like.
And I just want to give the opportunity, since this is a meeting, if anyone has any public comment. Okay, right. And then if I would have one of the members of the commission's motion to adjourn. And a second? Perfect.
Wait, all in favor?